The giant widow warned, "Don't look between my legs," but the lonely cowboy did, and his small cabin sat on the edge of a wide, empty plain where the wind whispered through the grass, carrying stories of travelers and animals long gone. Life had been simple for him. He woke with the sun, tended to his horses, mended fences, and worked the land. Yet despite the peace around him, he often felt a deep emptiness. The sunrises and sunsets, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the songs of birds offered little comfort to a man whose heart carried a silence only he could feel. He remembered the days when people were around, friends, family, neighbors, but time had slowly taken them away. Some moved to towns far off, others had passed on, leaving memories that sometimes felt like shadows he could almost touch but never hold. Loneliness, he realized, was not just the absence of people. It was the echo of a heart waiting for something it could not name. So he stayed on the plains, tending to his life, hoping that one day something, or someone, might break the monotony and give him a reason to keep going with a lighter heart. One afternoon, as he rode along a dusty trail that cut through a thick forest, he overheard a conversation between two merchants who had set up camp by the roadside. They spoke in low, hurried tones, glancing around nervously. "You heard about her?" one asked. "The giant widow lives beyond the hills. They say nobody who goes there comes back the same." The cowboy's ears perked up. A giant widow? What kind of woman was so powerful that even travelers whispered her name with caution? His curiosity stirred, a rare spark in his otherwise steady life. "A giant widow," the second merchant added, "tall as the tallest trees, with eyes that see too much. She has lived alone for years after losing her family. People say she knows things no one else can see, things that can change a man's life forever." The cowboy thought about these words as he rode further down the trail. Normally, he would have ignored gossip. But there was something about this story that called to him, not a sense of danger, but a feeling that he might finally find something more than the silence that had filled his life for so long. The idea of meeting someone who carried both sorrow and wisdom intrigued him. Perhaps, he thought, she might even understand the loneliness he carried like a second skin. He followed the trail as it twisted through hills and valleys, noticing the changing colors of the land. The forest thickened, and the sounds of birds and rustling leaves grew louder, almost as if the woods themselves were warning him to turn back. But he could not. The thought of discovering the giant widow's secret pulled him forward with a strength he had not felt in years. Each step seemed heavier with anticipation and excitement, yet lighter because he finally had a goal beyond the monotony of his daily life. When he reached the edge of the hills, the cowboy saw a small path leading up a steep slope. The path was lined with stones, smooth from years of weather and travel. He dismounted his horse, tying the reins securely to a tree, and began to climb slowly. The higher he went, the more he could see of the land below. The plains stretched endlessly, bathed in the golden glow of the late afternoon sun. It was beautiful, and yet he felt a shadow of apprehension settle over him. Something about this place felt different. Not threatening exactly, but alive in a way he could not explain. At the top of the hill he finally saw her. The giant widow stood in a small clearing, tall and straight, her presence commanding yet calm. She wore simple clothes, but her posture and the way she held herself suggested a life shaped by strength and experience. Her eyes, dark and deep, seemed to look right through him, as if she could see every thought that crossed his mind. The cowboy felt a shiver run down his spine. He had faced storms, wild animals, and days when the sun scorched the land mercilessly, yet nothing had prepared him for the quiet power of this woman. She was not angry or frightening in the way the stories suggested. Instead, there was a sadness and wisdom about her, like she had carried the weight of the world and learned to live with it gracefully. "Hello," he said, tipping his hat politely, unsure what else to say. She nodded, acknowledging him without words. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice calm and measured. "Why have you come here, stranger?" The cowboy hesitated. How could he explain that he was drawn by curiosity, by a loneliness that had settled in his bones, by a sense that meeting her might somehow fill the emptiness inside him? Instead, he said simply, "I was told you live here alone. I wanted to see for myself." The widow studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled faintly, a gesture that seemed both welcoming and wary. "Many come here seeking answers," she said. "Few understand what they will find. You must know some truths are heavy. Some knowledge changes a man more than he expects." The cowboy nodded. He had lived a long life among the harsh truths of the land. He thought he was ready for whatever she might reveal. But even as he said nothing, a small knot of unease formed in his stomach. Perhaps the stories were true, he thought. Perhaps this woman carried burdens that were too heavy for ordinary people to bear. For the next few days, he stayed in the clearing, helping the widow with her daily tasks. She had a small garden, tended to a few chickens, and kept her home neat despite its size. As they worked together, the cowboy noticed that she moved with an unusual grace for someone so tall. Every motion seemed deliberate, as if she had spent years mastering the art of living alone. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried weight and meaning, revealing a mind shaped by experience, loss, and survival. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing, the widow finally gave him a warning. "There is one thing you must not do," she said. "There is a boundary you must not cross. You must never look between my legs." The cowboy blinked, surprised by the strange phrasing. He had expected warnings about danger, loneliness, or sorrow, not something so unusual. I understand," he said carefully, not fully grasping the meaning but trusting her authority. The widow did not explain further. Her eyes, calm and steady, seemed to say more than words could convey. "Respect the limits," she added. "There is wisdom in restraint and consequences in disobedience. You will understand one day." The cowboy went to bed that night thinking about her words. He tried to imagine what the warning could mean, but nothing in his simple life prepared him for such a mystery. He fell asleep with a mix of curiosity and unease, wondering if the next day would bring clarity or confusion. As he lay under the stars, he felt the vastness of the world around him. The wind whispered through the trees, the night creatures called softly, and the loneliness that had once seemed endless now felt both distant and closer than ever. He realized that meeting the giant widow was not just about curiosity. It was about confronting the unknown, about stepping outside the boundaries of his ordinary life to find something deeper. The next morning, he awoke with determination. He would honor her warning for now, but he could not deny the pull of curiosity. The widow was not just a figure of stories. She was real, tangible, and full of secrets that seemed to hum in the air around her. The cowboy felt a strange excitement, a sense that he was standing on the edge of something far greater than the plains, the hills, or the forests he knew so well. And so, the cowboy's journey with the giant widow began, not with reckless bravado, but with careful observation, respect, and the quiet hope that perhaps, just perhaps, he might find a connection that could fill the emptiness he had carried for so long. Each day brought small discoveries: the sound of her voice, the way she moved, the hidden patterns of her life. And though the warning echoed in his mind, he could not shake the feeling that the most important lesson of all was yet to come. The loneliness that had defined him for years was slowly giving way to curiosity, to understanding, and to a tentative trust. The cowboy knew that the path ahead would not be easy, and that some things were meant to remain mysterious. But for the first time in a long while, he felt alive in a way that made the long, quiet nights of the plains seem almost worth enduring. He had crossed into a world where mystery and life intertwined, and he knew that whatever came next, he would never see the world the same way again. The cowboy stayed near the giant widow's home, his curiosity growing with each passing day. Every morning, he would rise with the sun and watch as she went about her work. She moved with a quiet strength, her tall frame carrying a presence that made the surrounding forest feel smaller in comparison. He noticed the way her hands worked the soil in the garden, how she carefully tended to each plant as if it were a living memory of someone she had lost. It was strange, he thought, how someone could live alone and yet create life in small, meaningful ways. Despite her silence for long stretches, the cowboy felt a connection forming between them. It was not a friendship in the usual sense. It was something deeper. He sensed that her eyes could see the truth behind his own, the loneliness he had carried like a cloak for years. He often wondered if she understood him better than anyone he had ever met, though neither of them spoke much about their pasts. The widow had her burdens and he had his, and somehow, in that quiet space, they seemed to acknowledge each other without words. One morning, while they were collecting water from a small stream, the widow paused and looked at him with those deep, piercing eyes. "You have come far, stranger," she said softly. "And yet there is something I must tell you. Some warnings are not just words. They are meant to protect you, not frighten you. And some things," she hesitated, "are too heavy for a man who is not ready to see them." The cowboy listened carefully. He had already heard the warning about looking where he should not, but he felt there was more to it. "I will be careful," he said. "I want to understand, I want to learn." The widow nodded, but there was a shadow in her gaze, a quiet sorrow that he could not ignore. "It is not enough to want to learn," she said. "Understanding comes when a man is ready. Knowledge can be a burden. Curiosity, if uncontrolled, can lead to regret. Remember this." Days turned into weeks, and the cowboy helped her with daily tasks. He would chop firewood, carry water, and repair fences, all while listening to the soft sounds of the forest and observing the widow's quiet routines. He began to notice patterns in her actions. She always left certain plants untouched in her garden, as if respecting a hidden rule. She never wasted a single movement and spoke only when necessary. The cowboy realized that her life was a careful balance between work, reflection, and memory. Each action she took seemed deliberate, a testament to the life she had built for herself after immense loss. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and orange, the widow asked him to sit by the fire with her. The cowboy hesitated, unused to sharing quiet moments with anyone, but he complied, sitting across from her as the flames flickered and cast dancing shadows on the walls of her small home. "You wonder about the warning, don't you?" she asked. The cowboy nodded, feeling the heat of the fire and the warmth of the conversation. "I do," he admitted. "I don't know why, but it keeps coming to my mind. I want to understand what it means, but I also respect it. I want to do what is right." The widow smiled faintly, a gesture that carried years of wisdom and sorrow. "Many before you have been tempted to look," she said. "Some out of fear, some out of curiosity, and some because they simply could not resist. Each one left changed. They thought they were seeking knowledge, but they were seeking something else, something that could not be given lightly." The cowboy listened, intrigued. "What did they see?" he asked. She shook her head gently. "I cannot tell you, not yet. Some truths are not meant to be shared in words. They must be felt, understood in the heart. And sometimes seeing too soon can shatter a man. You must be ready, or you will carry a burden too heavy for your soul." He thought about her words late into the night, lying under a sky filled with stars. He had never considered that knowledge could be dangerous. In his quiet life, he had faced storms, sickness, and loss, but the idea of being emotionally unprepared for something he wanted to see frightened him more than any natural danger ever could. Yet, even as fear crept in, his curiosity refused to fade. There was a strange pull toward understanding the unknown, a desire to see the truth for himself. The days that followed were filled with small lessons. The widow taught him to notice the subtleties of the land, the way the wind carried scents, how the position of the sun could reveal hidden paths, and how silence could speak louder than words. She never directly explained the warning again, but through her actions, he began to understand its deeper meaning. Respect was not just a rule, it was a practice, a way of navigating the world without causing harm to oneself or others. One afternoon, the cowboy noticed a small animal trapped under a fallen branch. Without hesitation, he lifted it gently and freed the creature, watching as it scurried back into the forest. The widow observed quietly, her eyes softening with approval. "You have a good heart," she said, "but heart alone is not enough. Patience, wisdom, and restraint are just as important. Do not confuse courage with understanding." He nodded, absorbing the lesson. Each day with her was a reminder that life was not simply about action. It was about knowing when to act and when to wait. And yet, as he followed her guidance, the curiosity inside him continued to grow. It was a quiet, persistent flame, never loud, never demanding, but always present. One evening, as a gentle rain fell and the wind whispered through the trees, the widow shared a story of her own past. She spoke of her family, of the losses she had endured, and of the loneliness that had shaped her. The cowboy listened intently, feeling the weight of her experiences and the depth of her wisdom. He realized that the warning she had given him was not just about a physical boundary. It was about emotional and spiritual preparedness. To truly understand something profound, a person had to be ready, and readiness could not be forced. Over time, the cowboy began to see the widow not just as a mysterious figure, but as a teacher, a guide, and in a way a companion. Their silence became comfortable, their shared tasks a form of unspoken communication. He began to notice the small joys in life again, the taste of fresh water from the stream, the smell of rain-soaked earth, the quiet beauty of a setting sun. These moments reminded him that life, even in its hardships, had value, and that the most important lessons often came from patience and observation rather than bold action. One morning, while they were tending the garden together, the widow paused and looked at him with a steady gaze. "You have been here for some time now," she said. "I can see your curiosity. I can see your desire to understand. But remember, curiosity without respect is dangerous. Knowledge is not just something to gain, it is something to live with." The cowboy nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had always believed that seeking answers was a mark of strength, but he now realized that wisdom lay in knowing when to wait and when to observe. Some truths, he understood, could only be revealed when the time was right. As the days passed, he found himself thinking less about the warning as a challenge and more as a guide. It was not a prohibition meant to provoke him, but a lesson in restraint and preparation. And with that understanding came a sense of calm he had not felt in years. The loneliness that had once defined him began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence that he could face whatever lay ahead, when the moment was right. Even so, the cowboy could not ignore the lingering curiosity within him. He felt the pull of the unknown, the urge to see beyond the boundaries set by the widow's warning. But now, he approached it with a sense of respect and patience rather than recklessness. He knew that the journey was just as important as the destination, and that true understanding required time, observation, and readiness. The bond between them deepened not through words, but through shared experiences and quiet companionship. The cowboy learned to appreciate the simplicity and complexity of life at the widow's home, the way every action had purpose, how every silence carried meaning, and how restraint could reveal more than immediate satisfaction ever could. And so, life continued, slow and deliberate, filled with lessons that were both simple and profound. The cowboy began to understand that the warning he had received was not just about a single act, it was about life itself. Some truths required patience, observation, and the courage to wait until the heart and mind were ready. And in that understanding, he began to feel a sense of growth and transformation. knowing that when the time came, he would be ready to face what awaited him, whatever it might be. The days with the giant widow passed slowly, yet each one carried a quiet intensity that the cowboy could feel deep in his heart. He had learned many lessons: patience, observation, restraint, but there remained a part of him that wanted to understand the full meaning of the warning. Curiosity was not something new to him. It had always been a quiet companion, a small spark that pushed him to explore, to see beyond what was visible. But now, living alongside the widow, that spark had grown into a persistent flame, gentle but insistent, urging him to look deeper. He noticed that the widow moved differently than anyone he had ever seen. Even in silence, she commanded the space around her. Her eyes seemed to hold memories that stretched beyond his understanding, and her presence felt like both a challenge and a comfort. The cowboy began to feel a mixture of awe and respect toward her, a feeling that was as confusing as it was powerful. He wanted to ask questions, but he knew that some answers could not be forced. They had to come naturally in their own time. One afternoon, as he helped her mend the fences along the edge of the clearing, he asked, "Do you ever regret being alone?" The widow paused, holding a heavy post in place, and looked at him with her deep, thoughtful eyes. "Regret is a strange thing," she said slowly. "I have lived many years in solitude, and I have felt loss, sadness, and loneliness. But I have also learned things that others never see. Solitude has a way of teaching patience, observation, and understanding. I would not trade it because it has made me who I am. And who I am, you will see in time, is shaped by what I have endured." The cowboy listened, feeling the weight of her words. He had known loneliness all his life, but he had never thought of it as a teacher. The widow's perspective made him pause. Perhaps his own solitude was not just an absence of companionship, but an opportunity to grow and prepare for the unknown challenges life might bring. Even so, the warning about looking where he should not lingered in his mind. It was strange, mysterious, and impossible to forget. Some nights, he found himself lying under the stars, thinking about what it could mean. He imagined that there was something powerful and dangerous hidden there, something that could change a person's life forever. The more he thought about it, the more he felt a mixture of fear and fascination. One evening, after a long day of work in the garden, he saw the widow sitting quietly on a large stone near the edge of the forest. She gestured for him to join her. The fireflies were beginning to light up the clearing, and the air was filled with the soft sounds of crickets and the distant call of an owl. "You are growing restless," she said softly, almost as if she could read his mind. I, I do not know why," the cowboy admitted. "I want to understand, but I also want to respect your warning. I feel like I am standing on the edge of something I do not fully understand." The widow nodded. "That is exactly it," she said. "You are standing on the edge of knowledge. And some knowledge, once seen, cannot be unseen. Curiosity can be a guide, but it can also be a test. You must decide if you are willing to accept the consequences of what you seek." The cowboy looked into the forest, feeling a strange tension in his chest. He had never thought of curiosity as a test before. He had always believed that seeking answers was simply part of life. But now, he realized that some truths could only be approached with caution, and that readiness was as important as desire. In the days that followed, he noticed small hints that the widow's warning was more than symbolic. She would sometimes pause while performing chores, staring at certain spots as if waiting for something unseen. She seemed to carry invisible boundaries that the cowboy could not cross, and yet he felt the pull of the unknown growing stronger inside him. Each moment spent near her was a lesson in self-control, yet also a reminder that his curiosity had not yet been satisfied. One morning, as the first rays of the sun touched the clearing, the cowboy went to the stream to fetch water. The water reflected the bright sky, but he saw something deeper in its surface, a reflection of his own longing, his desire to see and understand the mystery the widow guarded. He realized that this longing was natural, a part of being human. And yet, he also knew that acting on it recklessly could bring consequences he was not prepared for. The widow observed him from the edge of the forest, her eyes calm but vigilant. She said nothing, letting him grapple with his thoughts. The cowboy felt her presence like a gentle pressure, guiding him without force, teaching him the value of waiting, of thinking before acting. He began to understand that the warning was not just about a single act. It was about life itself, about the way knowledge, desire, and respect were intertwined. Later that day, the cowboy helped her repair a section of the fence that had been damaged during a storm. As they worked, he asked, "Have you ever had someone disobey your warning?" The widow's expression darkened slightly. "Many have," she said. "Some out of arrogance, some out of impatience, and some because their hearts were not ready." Those who ignored the warning left with heavy burdens. They learned too late that some truths cannot be approached without understanding their weight. I do not wish the same for you. The cowboy felt a chill run down his spine. He had always been brave, but he realized that courage alone was not enough. Understanding, patience, and respect were equally important. He felt a newfound determination to honor the boundaries set before him, even as his curiosity grew. Over the next few days, he noticed that his thoughts kept returning to the warning. It was not an obsession, but a quiet presence in the back of his mind. He would catch himself staring at the widow when she moved, feeling the pull of curiosity, yet quickly reminding himself of her words. He began to see the wisdom in restraint, recognizing that not all questions should be answered immediately. Some truths had to be approached slowly, with care and preparation. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the widow invited him to sit by the fire again. She placed a small basket of herbs and flowers between them, and the air was filled with a delicate scent. "You have been patient," she said, "but I can see the curiosity in your eyes. That is not a flaw. It is part of what makes you human. But remember this, curiosity without wisdom can lead a man into trouble. You must learn to balance your desire to know with the readiness of your heart." The cowboy nodded, feeling the truth in her words. He realized that his journey with her was not just about discovering a secret. It was about understanding himself, his own desires, and the importance of respect and restraint. He began to feel a quiet strength growing inside him, a sense of control over his curiosity rather than being controlled by it. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between the cowboy and the widow deepened. They no longer needed many words to communicate. Their actions, glances, and shared tasks spoke volumes. The cowboy began to notice the subtle ways in which the widow guided him, not by forcing lessons upon him, but by allowing him to learn naturally. Each experience became a test of patience and understanding, a preparation for the moment when he might finally face the truth behind the warning. Despite his growing self-control, the curiosity inside him never fully faded. It was a gentle, persistent pull that reminded him that there were mysteries in life meant to be approached with care. The cowboy realized that the journey itself was as important as the destination. He had learned to appreciate the small moments, the sound of the wind through the trees, the warmth of the fire at night, the quiet beauty of the clearing bathed in sunlight. And yet, he knew that eventually he would have to confront the choice the widow had warned him about. The thought filled him with both excitement and fear. He understood now that the warning was not just a simple rule. It was a test of character, of patience, and of readiness. And he was determined to meet that test with respect, even as his curiosity continued to grow. In the end, the cowboy realized that life with the widow had changed him in ways he could not fully explain. He was no longer simply a lonely man wandering the plains. He was someone who had learned the value of observation, restraint, and wisdom. He had come to understand that some truths required patience and preparation, and that the greatest lessons often came quietly, in the spaces between words and actions. And so the cowboy waited, watched, and learned, knowing that the time would come when he would face the choice that had been set before him. He did not know what he would find, but he understood that when that moment arrived, he would approach it with the respect, patience, and understanding that the widow had taught him. And in that readiness, he found a quiet confidence, a sense that he was no longer simply a man driven by curiosity, but a man prepared to face the truths of life, whatever they might be. The cowboy had been living near the giant widow for many weeks now, learning from her presence, her silence, and her quiet guidance. Each day brought new lessons about patience, observation, and respect, but still, a part of him felt a persistent pull toward the forbidden knowledge she had warned him about. He knew he could not ignore it forever. Every glance, every moment of stillness seemed to remind him of the boundary he had been told not to cross. Curiosity had grown from a spark into a gentle but constant flame inside him, urging him to understand what lay beyond the warning. One morning, as the sun rose softly over the hills, painting the forest in gold and pink, the cowboy woke early, filled with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The widow had gone to tend the garden, leaving him to prepare breakfast over the small fire. He moved carefully, aware of every sound, every shadow, as if the forest itself was watching him. Though he tried to focus on ordinary tasks, his mind kept wandering to the warning she had given him. "Do not look between my legs," she had said. The words had seemed strange at first, almost humorous, but now he felt their weight deeply. He understood that this warning was not about mere curiosity. It was a test of readiness, of understanding, of his ability to respect limits while still seeking truth. He thought about the lessons she had taught him: patience, restraint, and observation. He remembered how she had spoken of knowledge as something heavy, something that could change a man if he approached it too soon. And yet, the human mind craved answers. The cowboy felt a tension growing inside him, a struggle between curiosity and respect, between desire and wisdom. He knew that if he failed, the consequences would not be trivial. After breakfast, he accompanied the widow to the edge of the forest, carrying tools to repair a section of broken fence. She walked gracefully, her tall figure moving with purpose, and he noticed the way her presence seemed to calm the surrounding air. He tried to focus on the work, on the task at hand, but he found himself distracted. The curiosity that had been quietly growing for weeks now pressed insistently, demanding attention. As they worked, the widow paused and looked at him with her piercing eyes. "You are restless," she said softly. "I can see it in your movements and your thoughts. You are close to a choice. Know this: once made, the path cannot be undone. Some truths are irreversible. Are you ready?" The cowboy swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. I think I am," he replied, though even he was unsure. He had been patient, he had learned, and he had grown stronger in his understanding. But the idea of seeing what she had warned him about filled him with both excitement and fear. He was ready to face the unknown, but he did not fully understand what it would mean. The widow did not speak again, only gestured for him to follow her to a small clearing nearby. The air was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the forest itself held its breath. The cowboy felt a shiver run down his spine, not from fear, but from anticipation. This was the moment he had been approaching for weeks, the moment when his patience, restraint, and readiness would be tested. He stood beside her, feeling a strange mixture of respect and curiosity. The widow turned to him, her gaze steady and calm. "This is the moment," she said. "You may choose to look, but remember, knowledge comes with responsibility. You cannot unsee what you see, and your understanding of it will shape you forever. Are you prepared to carry that weight?" The cowboy nodded, though his heart raced. He had spent so many weeks learning, observing, and preparing himself. He knew that whatever he was about to see was not meant to frighten him, but to teach him a lesson about life, about boundaries, and about understanding the deeper truths that often lie hidden from ordinary sight. With careful steps, he approached the place she indicated, his mind alert and focused. He reminded himself of all the lessons she had taught him: respect, patience, observation, and readiness. He knew that this was not a moment to act recklessly, but a moment to witness, to absorb, and to understand. As he looked, he did not see what he had feared. There was no danger, no spectacle of power. Instead, he saw something profound, a reflection of human life itself. He saw sorrow, loss, and regret, but also resilience, strength, and wisdom. It was as if the widow's life, her choices, and her experiences were laid bare before him, not in words, but in understanding. He realized that the warning had been about more than a simple boundary. It was about facing the truth of life, about seeing the depth of experience and understanding the consequences of every choice. Tears filled his eyes as he absorbed the vision. He saw the struggles people endure, the moments of weakness, the lessons learned through suffering. He felt the weight of human emotion, the joy, the sorrow, the triumphs, and the defeats. The cowboy understood in that instant why the widow had warned him. Knowledge was not just information, it was responsibility, empathy, and understanding. To witness the truth of life was to carry it within oneself forever. The widow watched quietly, her eyes reflecting both pride and sadness. She had given him the warning not to prevent him from learning, but to ensure he was ready to bear the weight of understanding. The cowboy's heart, strengthened by patience and restraint, allowed him to face the truth without being overwhelmed. He realized that the moments leading up to this, weeks of careful observation, restraint, and learning, had prepared him for what he now saw. After a long silence, the cowboy turned to the widow. "I understand now," he said softly. "It is not just a warning, it is a lesson. The truth is not dangerous because of what it is, but because of how unprepared a person can be to carry it." The widow nodded, her face serene. "Exactly," she said. "Many seek knowledge without understanding the responsibility it brings. You have learned patience, restraint, and observation. You have prepared yourself to face what most cannot. That is wisdom." The cowboy felt a sense of calm wash over him. The curiosity that had driven him to this moment was now balanced with understanding. He realized that life was not about rushing to uncover mysteries, but about preparing oneself to meet them when the time was right. The lessons he had learned from the widow would stay with him forever, shaping his actions, his choices, and his understanding of the world. In the days that followed, he continued to live with the widow, but everything had changed. He no longer saw her merely as a mysterious figure, but as a guide and a teacher who had helped him understand the deeper truths of life. He approached each task with new respect, noticing the subtle lessons hidden in everyday actions. The wind, the forest, and the quiet moments all became part of his learning, teaching him that life's greatest truths often arrive quietly, without fanfare. He also began to notice changes within himself. The loneliness that had once felt unbearable was now replaced with a quiet strength. He understood the importance of boundaries, the value of patience, and the responsibility that came with knowledge. His heart, once restless with curiosity, was now calm and focused, ready to face the challenges of life with wisdom and empathy. The cowboy realized that the warning, the weeks of preparation, and the moment of understanding were not about fear or punishment. They were about readiness, growth, and transformation. The widow had guided him not to test his obedience, but to prepare his heart and mind to see what most could not. In that realization, he felt a deep gratitude for her presence and her teachings. One evening, as the sun set in a brilliant display of oranges and purples, the cowboy sat quietly beside the widow. The forest was alive with sounds, the rustle of leaves, the calls of distant birds, and the soft hum of insects. He reflected on everything he had learned: patience, respect, restraint, and the profound responsibility that comes with understanding life's truths. He realized that the experience had changed him forever, making him stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. He looked at the widow, whose calm eyes seemed to hold the weight of all human experience, and he felt a deep sense of respect and admiration. He knew that the lessons she had imparted were not just for the moment, they would guide him for the rest of his life. And in that quiet moment, he understood that true wisdom comes not from seeking knowledge recklessly, but from preparing oneself to receive it fully, with humility and readiness. The cowboy had faced the test, confronted his curiosity, and emerged transformed. He was no longer simply a man driven by desire for answers. He was a man prepared to live with understanding, patience, and respect. The widow had guided him to see the truth, and in doing so, she had helped him become someone stronger, wiser, and more complete than he had ever been before. And so, life continued in the quiet clearing, with the cowboy learning, observing, and growing under the careful guidance of the giant widow. He understood now that some moments in life require preparation, patience, and restraint, and that the greatest lessons are often hidden in the quiet spaces between curiosity and understanding. The cowboy awoke early that morning, as he had done countless times before, but something was different. The air felt lighter, the birds sang louder, and the sun seemed to rise with a new warmth. He realized that the weeks he had spent with the giant widow had changed him in ways he could feel deep in his heart. He was no longer the lonely man who had wandered the plains, restless and seeking meaning. He was someone who had learned patience, restraint, and the profound responsibility that comes with understanding life's truths. He prepared the morning fire with care, his movements calm and deliberate. The widow had gone to the garden, as usual, tending to her plants with the quiet grace that had fascinated him from the very beginning. For a moment he paused and looked around the clearing, taking in the beauty of the forest, the warmth of the sunlight, and the gentle sounds of life surrounding him. He realized that every lesson, every small task, and every moment of silence had been a part of his journey toward understanding. The cowboy reflected on the warning she had given him. "Do not look between my legs." At first, he had been confused, even tempted by the words. But now he understood that it had never been about curiosity in the ordinary sense. It had been about readiness, respect, and the ability to carry knowledge without being consumed by it. The moment he had finally understood the truth behind the warning had transformed him, showing him the depth of human experience, the weight of loss, and the power of wisdom. As he sat by the fire, he thought about how far he had come. He had entered the widow's world as a curious, lonely man, unsure of what he would find and unprepared for the lessons that awaited him. Yet, through observation, patience, and restraint, he had grown stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. He realized that the journey itself had been as important as the moment of understanding. Every task, every shared silence, and every glance had taught him something new, not just about the widow, but about himself and the world around him. Later that morning, the widow returned from the garden, carrying a small basket of herbs and flowers. She noticed the calm in his expression and smiled faintly, a gesture that conveyed both pride and satisfaction. "You have changed," she said softly. "The man who arrived here weeks ago is not the same as the man who sits before me now. You have learned patience, respect, and understanding. You have faced the truth with readiness, and that is wisdom." The cowboy nodded, feeling a quiet gratitude. "I have learned more than I could have imagined," he replied. "Not just about your warning, but about life itself. I understand now that knowledge is not simply something to be gained. It is something to live with, to carry carefully, and to respect." The widow's eyes softened, and she gestured for him to follow her to a small clearing at the edge of the forest. "There is one final lesson," she said. "It is not about what you see, but about what you do with what you have learned. Knowledge alone is not enough. It must guide your actions, your choices, and the way you live your life." The cowboy walked beside her, feeling the weight of her words. He realized that he had been prepared for this moment without even knowing it. The weeks of living with her, observing her actions, and learning her lessons had equipped him with the understanding he needed. He knew that life would continue to present challenges, temptations, and opportunities for curiosity, but he also knew that he now had the wisdom to face them with patience and restraint. In the clearing, they sat together as the sun reached its highest point in the sky. The widow spoke of her own past, of the losses she had endured, and the lessons she had learned. The cowboy listened, absorbing each word with the calm attention he had developed over the weeks. He realized that every story, every experience, and every piece of advice was part of a larger tapestry of understanding, one that he could now carry with him into the world. As the afternoon passed, the cowboy began to feel a sense of completion. He understood that his journey with the widow was not about seeking something forbidden, but about learning to respect boundaries, to prepare oneself for understanding, and to face life's truths with courage and humility. The warning, once a source of temptation and mystery, had become a symbol of wisdom, a reminder that knowledge must be approached carefully and responsibly. By evening, the cowboy felt a deep sense of peace. He had faced the challenge of curiosity and emerged transformed. He realized that the lessons he had learned would guide him for the rest of his life, shaping his choices, his actions, and the way he related to others. The loneliness that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence and a profound understanding of life's complexities. The widow looked at him with a gentle smile. "You are ready," she said. "Ready to return to the world, to live with the knowledge you have gained, and to carry it wisely. Remember, the greatest lessons are often hidden in the quiet moments, in the spaces between curiosity and understanding." The cowboy nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He knew that he could never fully repay the widow for the lessons she had given him, but he could honor them by living wisely, by respecting boundaries, and by carrying knowledge with care. He understood that true wisdom was not about knowing everything, but about knowing how to use what one knows in the right way. That night, as he prepared to leave the clearing, he looked around one last time. The forest, the garden, and the small home of the widow had become a part of him. He felt a connection to the quiet strength, patience, and wisdom he had observed. He realized that life would continue to present challenges, but he was now ready to face them with understanding, empathy, and restraint. The cowboy mounted his horse and looked back at the widow. She stood tall and serene, a figure of strength and wisdom that he would carry in his heart forever. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion, "for everything." The widow nodded, her eyes reflecting both pride and gentle sadness. "Go now," she said. "Live wisely and remember what you have learned. Some truths are not meant to be revealed immediately, but when they come, they must be carried with care." As he rode away, the cowboy felt a sense of freedom he had never known. He was no longer bound by loneliness, fear, or uncontrolled curiosity. Instead, he carried a quiet strength, a deep understanding, and a respect for the boundaries that guide life. He knew that the lessons of the widow would stay with him forever, shaping his actions and his understanding of the world. The plains stretched before him, vast and open, filled with possibilities and challenges. But he no longer felt small or unprepared. He had learned to face the unknown with patience, to approach knowledge with respect, and to carry understanding with responsibility. The journey he had taken with the widow had transformed him, preparing him for whatever life might bring. Days turned into weeks, and the cowboy returned to his own land. But he was no longer the same man who had left. He approached life with a new perspective, noticing the small details, appreciating the quiet moments, and understanding the deeper truths behind ordinary events. He shared what he had learned, not the secret itself, but the lessons of patience, respect, and readiness, with those he met along the way. People who once saw him as a lonely, quiet man now noticed a change in him. He carried himself with confidence and calm, and his presence seemed to inspire trust and respect. He never spoke of the warning or the lessons of the widow directly, knowing that each person must find their own path to understanding. But the wisdom he had gained radiated in his actions, in his patience, and in the way he listened and observed the world around him. Years later, the cowboy would think back on the time he spent with the giant widow. He would remember the quiet moments, the lessons learned in silence, and the profound understanding that had come from facing the unknown with patience and respect. The experience had shaped him, not by revealing a simple secret, but by teaching him how to approach life, knowledge, and human understanding with wisdom and care. And though he never returned to the clearing where the widow lived, he carried her teachings with him always. He knew that true knowledge is not measured by what one sees, but by how one lives with what one has learned. He had faced the challenge of curiosity, understood the weight of knowledge, and emerged stronger, wiser, and transformed. In the quiet moments of his later life, he would often sit under the stars, reflecting on the lessons he had learned. He would smile, knowing that the journey with the widow had changed him forever. He had discovered that life's greatest truths are not always visible, but they can be understood through patience, respect, and readiness. And in that understanding, he had found the connection, the wisdom, and the peace that he had sought for so long. The lonely cowboy was no longer lonely. He had learned to see, to listen, and to understand. He had learned to respect boundaries, to carry knowledge responsibly, and to approach life with patience and wisdom. And in doing so, he had discovered the true meaning of connection, growth, and the quiet power of understanding.